triangles of the neck. If you see into this picture, it might look complicated for you, and some of the students might be feeling it difficult to remember. So I have tried to simplify the whole thing, and you should remember only some important things, and you can remember, if you remember only 2 lines and 3 bones and 4 muscles, you can remember all the triangles of the neck. The first thing you should remember is the midline structures. We have already seen the midline structures, which are the midline structures, so you should know which are the midline structures here. So first you have to remember one line is the midline structures of the neck. The second thing is the imaginary line which you will be drawing from the angle of the mandible up to the mastoid process, which continues with the spherical line. So this is the second imaginary line which you should remember. One is which begins from the angle of the mandible and goes up to the mastoid process. So these are the 2 lines you should remember. One is the midline structures here, and the second is the imaginary line drawn from the angle of the mandible up to the mastoid process. You have to remember 3 bones here. Mandible, one is the mandible, the second is the clavicle here, and the third is the hyoid bone. And 4 muscles. One is the trapezius, this is the big muscle of the back, this is called as the trapezius, fan shaped muscle. The second muscle you should remember is the sternocleidomastoid muscle, this is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And the third muscle you should remember is the omohyoid, this is the omohyoid muscle here. And the fourth muscle you should remember is the digastric muscle. If you remember these 2 lines, 3 bones and 4 muscles, then you can write for any boundary. If they ask you any boundary of any triangle, then you can easily write if you remember these 2 lines, 3 bones and 4 muscles. So the 2 lines are the midline structure of the neck in the front, and the line, imaginary line drawn from the angle of the mandible up to the mastoid process. 3 bones, mandible, then we have the clavicle here and the hyoid bone here, and 4 muscles. One is the trapezius, the big muscle of the back, then the sternocleidomastoid muscle, then the third muscle is the omohyoid, this is the omohyoid here, and the fourth muscle is the digastric muscle. Now we'll put it in simple form here, and you can remember. So before we go to that, you should remember that the omohyoid has 2 bellies, a superior belly, this is the superior belly of omohyoid, and this is the inferior belly of omohyoid. This is the same muscle. Okay, so you should remember omohyoid, and superior means above, this is the belly, it has 2 bellies, just like digastric also. So this also has 2 bellies, one is the superior belly which is above, and the inferior belly which is below. And similarly the digastric also has 2 bellies, but it is not superior and inferior, but it is anterior in the front and posterior, that is the behind. So this is the anterior belly here, this is the posterior belly. This is what you are supposed to remember, and if you remember these, inshallah you can write any triangle, the boundaries of any triangle. I have put these same names in a simplified fashion. So the 2 lines are midline structures here in the front, and this is the imaginary line drawn from the angle of mandible up to the mastoid process. 3 bones, the mandible here, this is the hyoid bone here, and the clavicle 3 bones, and 4 muscle, this is the trapezius here, sternocleidomastoid, and this is the omohyoid, this is the superior belly, and this is the inferior belly, same muscle with the superior and inferior belly, omohyoid, and the digastric muscle, this is the anterior belly and posterior belly. Okay, so this is what you are supposed to remember, and if you remember this, now you can discuss about the triangles. So this whole of the neck, if they ask you the boundaries of the whole of the one side of the neck, so you can easily write, this is the, in the front we have the midline structures of the neck. Superiorly it is, there is a quadrilateral area, so it has 4 boundaries. In the front we have the midline structures, and here superiorly we have the base of the mandible and the imaginary line drawn from the angle of mandible up to the mastoid process, and the spherical line, and posterior boundary is the anterior border of the trapezius, this is the trapezius here, and below we have the clavicle. So these are the 4 boundaries for this whole of this area of the neck, one side of the neck. This is the quadrilateral area. Now this quadrilateral area is divided into two triangles. One is the anterior triangle and the posterior triangle by a muscle. This is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This is the big muscle which is called as the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay, so it begins from the sternum and the clavicle and get inserted to the mastoid process. So this is called as the sternocleidomastoid, SCM. Okay, this muscle will divide the whole of the neck, one side of the neck, into an anterior triangle which is in front of this and a posterior triangle which is behind that. So this muscle is the main muscle which divide the whole of the neck into an anterior triangle and the posterior triangle. Now if they ask you the boundaries of the anterior triangle, again now it becomes easy for you that in the front we have, this is the midline structures of the neck. This is a reverse triangle like this. Okay, with the apex downwards toward the mandibular sterni and the base is upwards here. Okay, so the anterior boundary is by the midline structures, the posterior boundary is by the sternocleidomastoid, the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle here. So the sternocleidomastoid posteriorly and superiorly, the base is formed by the base of the mandible itself as well as the imaginary line drawn from the angle of mandible up to the mastoid process. So these are the three boundaries. In the front we have the midline structures, behind we have the sternocleidomastoid, and above by the mandible and the imaginary line. So these are the boundaries of the anterior triangle. Now if they ask you the boundaries of the posterior triangle, so this is the posterior triangle here with the apex towards the occiput and the base is toward the clavicle. Okay, so in the front we have the sternocleidomastoid. The posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid will form the anterior boundary. Below we have the clavicle, and behind we have the trapezius. So the anterior border of the trapezius, and below we have the middle 1/3 of the clavicle which form the base. So this is the base and here is the apex. When the two muscles where they meet, the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius, that form the apex. So for this, if they ask you the boundaries of the posterior triangle, right, in the front we have the sternocleidomastoid, behind we have the trapezius, and below we have the clavicle. The base is formed by the clavicle. Now if we want to study the boundaries of the smaller triangles within these anterior and posterior triangle, the posterior triangle, as you remember, is divided into two triangles. One is the occipital triangle and the supraclavicular triangle. These are the two triangles which are formed in the posterior triangle by a muscle here called as the inferior belly of the omohyoid. So this inferior belly will divide the posterior triangle into a larger triangle. This is called as the occipital triangle, and a smaller triangle, this is called as the supraclavicular triangle. So if they ask you the boundaries of the occipital triangle, then you should write that in the front we have anterior boundary is formed by the sternocleidomastoid, the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, the posteriorly by the trapezius, anterior border of the trapezius, and inferiorly it is the inferior belly of the omohyoid. Okay, these are the three boundaries. Whenever we talk about a triangle, it will have three boundaries. So we should be able to tell the three boundaries. So anteriorly we have the sternocleidomastoid here, posteriorly we have the trapezius, and inferiorly the base is formed by the inferior belly of the omohyoid. So what are the contents? If they ask you the contents, so they might ask you the boundaries and contents. So when they ask you the content, one of the important content is a very important nerve, the cranial nerve, that is the 11th cranial nerve, which supplies the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius, that is the accessory nerve. The spinal part of the accessory nerve will be passing through this. So one of the very important content. Okay, the second is because it is an occipital triangle, so there will be an artery here that is called as the occipital artery. Okay, the other contents are there are the cervical nerves, lesser occipital, greater auricular, and other supraclavicular nerves, and the transverse cervical artery, and other contents which you should know. Now going to the next triangle, the smaller triangle in the posterior triangle, that is called as the supraclavicular triangle. It is called as supraclavicular because it is above the clavicle. Supra means above, because it is above the clavicle, so it is called a supraclavicular triangle. This is also called as the subclavian triangle. Okay, we will discuss about that. Okay, the boundaries of this triangle, anteriorly what do you have here? This is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay, posteriorly we have, this is the omohyoid inferior belly, and the base is formed by, this is the clavicle. So these are the boundaries of this supraclavicular triangle. Anteriorly we have sternocleidomastoid, posterior border, and the posteriorly we have the inferior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and the base is formed by the middle 1/3 of the clavicle. So what are the contents? The contents, as I said, this is also called as subclavian triangle. So there are very important structures here. One is the subclavian artery, the subclavian vein. Subclavian artery is the main artery which supplies the upper limb, and subclavian vein is the main vein which will be draining the upper limb. Along with that, the brachial plexus can also be traced here. Okay, so the name itself indicates many things. Okay, so it is called a subclavian, so it means there is subclavian artery as well as the subclavian vein as well as the brachial plexus and other structures. Okay, then going to the boundaries of the anterior triangle. So as we have already seen the boundaries of the anterior triangle, this is in the front we have the midline structures of the neck, and the base is superiorly here because there is a reverse triangle with the base of the mandible and a line drawn from the angle of the mandible up to the mastoid process, and posterior we have the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid will form the posterior boundary for this triangle. Coming to the smaller triangles which are within the anterior triangle, one is the muscular triangle. So the first triangle is, this is the triangle, this is called the muscular triangle. Okay, so the boundaries of this triangle, in the front we have the midline structures of the neck. Okay, and posterior superiorly we have this muscle which is this is the superior belly of the omohyoid, and posterior inferiorly we have this muscle which is this sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay, so these are the boundaries. Anteriorly we have the midline, posterior superiorly we have the superior belly of the omohyoid, and we have the posterior inferiorly we have the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So this is the muscular triangle. Why it is called as muscular triangle? Because the main contents of this triangle are the muscles. Which muscles? Because it is below the hyoid bone, so all the muscles which are here are the infrahyoid muscles, like the sternohyoid, sternothyroid, thyroid, and all these contents. Omohyoid form the boundary. Okay, so this is the triangle which is called a muscular triangle because it has muscles within the triangle. But if you go deep inside, then you can trace the trachea, the thyroid gland, esophagus, and other things. But superficially in this triangle only we have the muscle. That's why it is called as muscular triangle. Going to the next triangle, the most important triangle in this is the carotid triangle. So this is the carotid triangle here, which is the most important triangle. Okay, so the boundaries, what are the boundaries here? So we have posteriorly, this is the muscle which is this is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid will form the posterior boundary. Superior anteriorly we have this muscle which is this digastric muscle. Which belly? Posterior belly. This will form the superior boundary, anterior superiorly. Anterior inferiorly we have this muscle which is this is the omohyoid superior belly. So here we have anterior superiorly we have the posterior belly of the digastric, and anterior inferiorly we have the superior belly of the omohyoid, and posteriorly we have the sternocleidomastoid. These are the boundaries of this triangle. What are the contents? As the name indicates, it has a very important structure, that is the carotid sheath, and within the carotid sheath we have the carotid artery, the common carotid artery, and its two terminal branches, the external carotid and the internal carotid. So this is the most important content of this triangle, because this is the main artery which supplies the head and neck and face as well as the brain. the two terminal branches, the external and internal carotid. External carotid will be supplying the face, the head and neck and the scalp, and the internal carotid artery will be the main artery which supplies one of the two main arteries which supply the brain. It goes deep inside, it doesn't give any branches here, goes deep inside and supplies the brain. So this is the most important. Okay, so this is the carotid sheath and the carotid artery and its terminal branches. What are the other contents of the carotid sheath? The internal jugular vein. Second important content is the internal jugular vein. Which is the third content? The nerve, the vagus nerve. So it is the neurovascular bundle. So it has an artery, that is the carotid artery, a vein, internal jugular vein, and the vagus nerve. Okay, so these are some of the important contents of this triangle. There are other contents which you can read, but here you can easily remember with this name, the carotid sheath and its contents. Okay, now going to the third triangle here. This is the third triangle, which is called as the submandibular triangle. Why it is called a submandibular triangle? Because it is below the mandible. Sub means below, mandibular, so it is because it is below the mandible. It is also called a submandibular triangle because it has submandibular gland. Okay, before we go to the other contents, we'll just discuss about the boundaries. Okay, superiorly, this is this is a reverse triangle, so this forms the base. Superiorly we have the base of the mandible itself, as well as the line, imaginary line drawn from the angle of mandible up to the mastoid process. And inferiorly we have, inferiorly, this is the, what is this muscle? This is the digastric muscle, anterior belly of the digastric. Posterior inferiorly we have the posterior belly of the digastric. Because out of the three boundaries of the triangle, two boundaries are by digastric, so it is also called as the digastric triangle. Okay, so once again I repeat, the base is formed by the base of the mandible and the imaginary line drawn from the angle of mandible up to the mastoid process. Anterior inferiorly we have the anterior belly of digastric. Posterior inferiorly we have the posterior belly of the digastric. So this is also called as the digastric triangle because it has two boundaries out of the three formed by the digastric. It is also called a submandibular triangle because it is below the mandible, and one of the important content is the submandibular gland. What are the other contents? Here we have a very important artery, which one of the most tortuous artery, and we supply the face. So it should be the facial artery, and the vein accompanying along with that will be also there. So one of the content is the submandibular gland itself. Then we have the facial artery, then the facial vein, as well as the submandibular group of lymph nodes can also be traced here. There are other contents which can be again studied, but with the name and the boundaries you can remember some of the contents. Coming to the last triangle, this is the submental triangle. This is called a submental because it is below the mentum. Okay, so this is the mentum here, it is below the mentum, that's why it is called as the submental, below the mentum. Okay, so here again you can see this is again a different picture with the same boundaries. We have shown here the midline structures of the neck and the imaginary line drawn from here, and the mandible, hyoid bone and the clavicle are here, and the four muscles, 2 lines, 3 bones and 4 muscles, digastric, omohyoid, then this omohyoid, then we have the sterno, the cleidocmastoid, then we have the trapezius behind. Okay, we are talking about the submental triangle. Okay, so here is the submental triangle. This is called as half triangle because half of the triangle of one side will join with the half of the triangle of the other side to form a complete triangle. This is the triangle here. Okay, what are the boundaries of this triangle? One is the digastric muscle, which belly, it is the here it has been mistakenly written as posterior belly. It should be the anterior belly. So this is the anterior belly of the digastric. So it should be the anterior, please correct this one. This is the anterior belly of the digastric here. The two sides, both the two bellies of the either side, the anterior bellies of the either side will be forming the two boundaries. Okay, so anterior belly of the digastric, and here on the other side also the anterior belly of the digastric of the other muscle. Okay, posterior bellies are behind. Okay, and then inferior, the base is formed by the hyoid bone. So this is the triangle. So this is the hyoid bone, and this form the triangle. This is the submental triangle. It is below the mentum, so it is called as the submental triangle. The two boundaries are the antibelly of digastric of one side, then the antibelly of the digastric of the other side, and the base is formed by the hyoid bone. Okay, and this is the triangle. So this is half of the triangle. Half of one side joins with the half of the other side to form a complete triangle. So it is said to be on each side we have 3.5 triangles on in the anterior triangle. Well, that is the muscular triangle here, then we have the carotid triangle, then we have the submandibular triangle here. There are complete triangles, and the fourth triangle is actually half of the triangle. This will be the submental triangle, which joins with the half of the other side to form a complete triangle. So on each side we have 3.5 anterior triangle, and the anterior triangle is divided into 3.5 again triangles, that is the muscular triangle, the carotid triangle, then the submandibular triangle, and half of the mental triangle. So these are the boundaries of all these triangles. So what is the content of the submental triangle? Very minor. There are small group of submental group of lymph nodes 3 to 4. That's all. There are no important structures in this triangle. Okay, so this is about all the triangles and the content. Some of the content, not all the contents, which can be remembered just by the name or from the boundaries. Okay, so now it is much easy to remember all these boundaries and the content. Only you have to remember is two lines, anterior midline, and the line, imaginary line drawn from the angle of mandible to the muscular process. Then we have to remember three bones, mandible, hyoid bone, and the clavicle, and four muscles. One is the trapezius, then we have the sternocleidomastoid, then the omohyoid muscles, superior belly and inferior belly, and the fourth is the digastric, anterior belly and posterior belly. If you remember this, and if you remember this picture, you can write boundaries of any triangle. Okay, so the posterior triangle, this is the posterior triangle, this is the anterior triangle. Posterior triangle is again divided into a larger triangle, above triangle, this is called as the occipital, and below we have smaller triangle, this is called as the supraclavicular or subclavian triangle. And anterior triangles, there are 3.5. One is the most anterior here, this is the muscular triangle, then we have the carotid triangle here, then we have the submandibular, and half of the submental triangle. Okay, so these are the boundaries and the contents. If you remember this picture with these two lines, three bones, and four muscles, then you can, if they ask you any triangle, you can write easily boundaries, and some of the contents are dependent on the name itself, so you can imagine those content, and the others you have to read, and inshallah you can easily perform in the examination. So if you have any doubts regarding this, you can always ask the question. Okay, thank you very much.